as we address this issue of Make in India and whether it can be a $1 trillion reality, and our mission towards that object, 12 months down the line, do you believe that there is a little bit of a reality check now in terms of the kind of reforms that are politically acceptable, the kind of reforms that you will be able to push through? I contextualize my question in light of what has happened as far as the land bill is concerned, for instance. You repromulgated the ordinance 3 times around. You've now decided to let the ordinance lapse. You've brought in a statutory order which has caused a little bit of confusion. I may ask you to elaborate on the necessity for the statutory order as well. Even other things, for instance, the need for airport privatization. There has been a pushback as far as airport privatization is concerned. Port corporatization, there has been a pushback as far as the agenda of port corporatization is concerned. In that context, may I ask you if it is getting increasingly difficult for you to take bold, decisive, politically acceptable or politically not acceptable reforms? Is there a reality check that's set in?
I think you must be always aware of the reality, because management of the economy is neither speaking in a seminar nor in a television program. It is actually to be implemented, and therefore the determination and the direction has to be absolutely clear. Now, you asked about 3 sectors. I am reasonably clear about each of the 3 sectors that you asked about. You wanted to know why the order was passed. I think if you read the 2013 land law, probably the worst drafted legislation in Indian legislative history, I have been able to shortlist 45 drafting errors in it. And once this dust settles down on what happens 48 hours from now, I can go into details of the kind of confusion in that law that exists. Now, one of the provisions on the law is separate provisions relating to compensation, relief and rehabilitation. That's one part of the law,
sure,
which not many people had a difficulty with, because farmers have to be paid more. The second part of the law dealt with some confused provisions relating to consent. I'm using the word confused because the more I read the law, the more its ambiguity surfaces as to for what consent is required and it's not required. Probably the draftspersons themselves do not know. I tried discussing with them and they evaded a discussion as to whether consent is required in most cases. My reading is that in most cases it's probably, the other interpretation is may not even be required, because that's how badly it is drafted. And then a social impact assessment, which may be there, but the time schedule, if you add all the steps, is 52 months. Now, if you have 52 months for one step of that bill, which is social impact assessment, up to 52 months. But there also it's badly drafted because it says not more than 6 months, up to 6 months. So there may be some discretion with the states under rules to shorten that period. Then you have a provision which says, well, if an acquired land is not fully used in 5 years, now 100 smart cities can't come up in 5 years. Gandhinagar is coming up for the last 40 years. Noida hasn't been completed in the last 35 years. So those houses and buildings which are built in 5 years will remain built. Otherwise, agricultural crops will come up again. Now, that's why I say it's a law which really somebody has to seriously look at. Now, Section 105 of that law says that within 1 year of that law, a notification has to issue which will apply the compensation, relief and rehabilitation provisions to those 13 exempted acts. So those 13 exempted acts don't need a consent, they don't need a SIA, but by a statutory order you will apply these very compensation provisions to that act.
Right.
So that order had to be issued by the 31st of December. Now that 31st December has got extended to 31st August because of 3 successive ordinances. Now if the ordinance doesn't continue, you will certainly need a backup to comply with that provision. And the draftsperson of the law yesterday said, what is the need for this statutory order? That means he hasn't read 105. Now the government is very clear. We called all the chief ministers in the Niti Aayog. The Prime Minister himself sat with them. Land is a concurrent list subject. All the chief ministers unanimously said there are some changes which are required. Either you do it, but if you are victims of a parliamentary stalemate, then allow us to do it in the states. Because it's a concurrent list subject, we will make the amendment. We only need central government permission. In fact, Tamil Nadu has already amended it and sought the central government permission. Some other states may follow. So the idea is not how well you are involved in a parliamentary stalemate, particularly if you have a cussed opponent who says, I must stop India's progress.
But in the interim, sir, the ordinance lapses on the 31st of August. So we go back to the 2013
so you'll have to wait for the next 48 hours. Mr. Major had said a week is too long a time.
Are you likely to re-promulgate the ordinance?
Well, I think you're looking for a news headline, but
that's my job, sir.
So please wait for 48 hours. Now you mentioned airports. Now you've had a few major airports in the country on different models. Cochin was a different model, Bangalore and Hyderabad are different models, Delhi and Mumbai are different models, which have developed to global standards. Now with the kind of money the airport authority had, it started developing the other airports. So if you've seen Calcutta recently, if you've seen smaller states, the airports have started developing. Now nobody has decided that the management, operation and management can't be given to a private party. It can be. But you'll have to select which are the airports which you are willing to give it to a private party.
They were already selected, sir. 6 of them were already selected, and we haven't seen any forward movement on that.
Some of them, in a number of them, the Ministry of Civil Aviation is going ahead with the policy of O&M. So instead of development O&M, it is O&M because, and that is for Sunil Munjal and others on the dais to look at, the ones which have been developed by the airport authority cost a minuscule percentage compared to the ones which have been developed by private parties. And I think this is an issue which some of the private sector companies will itself introspect. And if you go and, after all, most people here travel to those airports also, some of them have done exceedingly well, the smaller ones which have come up. Now you wanted to know about the port
corporatization plan.
I think port is a very strange sector. You have a traditional law which talks of major ports and minor ports. Major ports are run by the central government, minor ports are run by the state governments or authorized by the state governments. Now the major ports are no longer very major. And most of the minor ports, Gujarat itself is an example of a number of so-called minor ports which have become much bigger than the so-called major ports. Major share of traffic has already gone to corporatized ports. Now in these trust-based ports, either you can have a corporate model which you have at Ennore, and you can then see how the corporatized port is to be run. Alternatively, you can have berths being given to private parties for management.
If you can give us a hint, sir, what is likely over the next 48 hours that will make you decide whether you will re-promulgate the ordinance? Has the Congress party come on board? Are you likely to prorogue the session, or a special session is likely, sir?
No, you see, the discussion with regard to the special session is only with regard to the GST.
GST, yes.
Now, I find some of the issues raised by the Congress party completely unsustainable. The first issue they have raised it, the Constitution itself must say that 18% is the outer limit of the band. Now, is there any constitution in the world where taxation levels are provided in the Constitution itself? Tomorrow you have a global crisis and you want to increase taxes on a particular commodity. Are you going to amend the Constitution before you do that and go to 50% of the states and ask for permission to do that?
Sure.
But it's an unsustainable. If it was so sustainable, why did Mr. Pranab Mukherjee's bill or Mr. Chidambaram's corrections not provide for that amount being mentioned in the Constitution itself? Now, I'll show you the fallacy, the lack of depth in whoever conceived of that argument. Tomorrow, petroleum products will come into the bill, may come. At a later stage, alcohol will come. These are possibilities as the system grows. Now, are soap cakes and alcohol to be taxed at the same limit? You may actually decide to have negligible taxation on soap and a much higher taxation on alcohol. Now, are you saying the Constitution says 18% should never be crossed in the case of alcohol? So, it's unsustainable objections. And I don't think people who've raised the objections have seriously understood, but those who have administered...
Any breakthrough at all?
Alternatively, let me give you the other example. The second is, you must have a dispute redressal mechanism headed by a Supreme Court judge who will decide taxes. Today, there is a legitimate concern that governments are becoming weaker and separation of powers is being obliterated. Courts are getting into executive domain. Taxation power is something which at least always the government of the day has. But it's a suggestion which effectively means that there is a dispute between a state and a state or the center of the state. Taxation limits are going to be decided by the Supreme Court. Does it happen anywhere in the world? And is India going to delay its GST based on such unsustainable objections?
Sir, has there been a breakthrough? Are we likely to see a special session?
Well,
and will the
there
GST
could be
go through?
You see, if the argument was on merits of these amendments which have been suggested by the wise men in the Congress party, then probably we could come to a decision across the board in whatever discussions I've had, and I've had extensive discussions with them.
Okay.
The idea is our leadership is not comfortable helping you at this moment.